organization of leaders from many different faith traditions and beliefs in the Bay Area stewards the Presidio Chapel in partnership with the Presidio Trust. As a regional organization, we gather and advise leaders from interfaith councils around the Bay Area, in addition to providing events and services at the chapel. We are a peace stop for the United Nations, the United Religions Initiative, and the United States Department of State International Visitor Leadership Program. As a historical building in a former military installation, the Presidio Chapel played a major role in serving the spiritual needs of soldiers and their families from 1931 until the post closed in 1994. The building was built in 1931. It was a Works Progress Administration project at a cost of $39,000 in the Spanish colonial revival style. In the foyer, the mural depicting the history of California and the peaceful occupations of the Army was painted by Victor Arnautoff. The stained glass windows in the sanctuary were created by Wilhelmina Arnautoff, who came to this country from the Netherlands after World War I. She was the first woman stained glass artist west of the Mississippi to be inducted into the Stained Glass Artists Guild. During her working career, she created over 500 stained glass windows. The windows in this chapel were donated by military and auxiliary organizations: the Grand Army of the Republic, the American Legion, the Women's Relief Corps, Disabled American Veterans, the veterans of the Spanish-American War, and veterans of foreign wars. Above the entry to the chapel, the window was donated by the 30th U.S. Infantry, who was stationed at the Presidio from 1901 to 1941 and fought at the Second Battle of the Marne in World War I. Although windows depict virtues the military admired: courage, mercy, loyalty, honor, martyrdom, reverence, sacrifice, and daring. We invite you to come back to the chapel and take one of our docent tours to learn more about its history. After tonight's presentation, if you would like to receive email notifications of our upcoming events, please sign our form in the mural room. I wanted to share, we have 3 events in the month of October. This coming Sunday here at the chapel, the Mayfield Singers present their concert, Let Me Fly. On Sunday, the 13th of October, for the first time, we will have a Blessing of the Fleet Interfaith Sunday service here at the chapel from 10 to 11. And on Sunday, October 20th, in our Sunday Concerts at Presidio Chapel series, we will be presenting to Wawa House, an opera that tells the compelling and truly American story of a Central Ohio resort hotel that served as a vacation spot for white slave owners and their black mistresses and children before the Civil War, and became a stop on the Underground Railroad and eventually the first African-American owned and managed university. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Lucia Bogate, the president of the Presidio Historical Association, and welcome her to the chapel.
Thank you, Mary. That was a wonderful introduction. Now I don't have to introduce myself. And I thank you all for coming to this event. I welcome you on behalf of the PHA, the Interfaith Center at the Presidio, and the Institute for Historical Study, who are our co-sponsors for this wonderful event. And thanks to the Reverend Jerry Caprio and Harlow, who's president of HIS. We look forward to more collaborations in the interest of history and Presidio. And thanks also to our wonderful administrative expert, Samantha and Paul Warmer, for organizing this event. There will be lemonade and various things to eat out afterwards in the East Lobby. No food is allowed in the chapel, but we hope you will have a bite with us and so we can get acquainted. Anyone interested in joining PHA should talk to Samantha. I am now so pleased to introduce Dr. Robert Cherny. He's an Emeritus Professor in History at San Francisco State, a PhD from Columbia. He's focused in his career on politics and labor in the West after 1864. I'm sorry, you didn't miss much. He's focused in his career on politics and labor in the West after 1865. He is author of a biography of Victor Arnautoff, who painted the murals in the East Entry Hall, and he is a longtime member of the PHA board. Bob, you can take it from here.
Okay. How does this sound? Those of you who may not be aware of Victor Arnautoff's connection to the George Washington High School murals have probably been asleep for the last several months because it's been really hard to avoid all of the publicity that those murals have received, and they still remain in danger. Out on the table in the lobby where you come in, there's some information from the Coalition to Protect Public Art. And so if you're interested in helping to protect the Arnautoff murals and other public art, you can pick up some of the information out there on that table. So I'm planning to talk for maybe 45 or 50 minutes, after which there'll be ample time for you to raise any questions or any comments that you care to ask. And I'll apologize in advance that a few of the slides are not of the quality that I had hoped for, but I think most of them will give you a very good idea of what those murals look like. Probably many of you have actually seen the murals, have you? Just out of curiosity, how many of you have been to Coit Tower? Oh, it looks like well over half. Good. Okay, so you've seen the actual thing. When Lily Hitchcock Coit died in 1929, she left a bequest to, quote, add to the beauty, unquote, of our city. And eventually, the decision was made to build this tower, which was completed in October of 1933. It is not a memorial to San Francisco firefighters, as is sometimes supposed. It is a memorial to Lily Hitchcock Coit. The architects were Arthur Brown Jr., who was also the architect of City Hall, and Henry Howard, who was the son of the architect of the San Francisco Main Library and also much of UC Berkeley. Coit Tower was completed in the pit of the Great Depression, with roughly a third of the workforce unemployed nationwide and a much higher proportion in some cities. The newly elected president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, took office in March of 1933. He and Harry Hopkins soon created the first federal programs to provide work relief for the unemployed, initially at least through grants to states. Later, in 1933, they created the Civil Works Administration to provide direct federal work relief for the unemployed in order to get them through the winter. It was seen as a temporary program. At the same time, George Biddle, a longtime friend of President Roosevelt, was encouraging the president to hire unemployed artists to create modernist art in public buildings. In December of 1933, this led to the creation of the Public Works of Art Project, PWAP, as part of the Civil Works Administration. At the time, Diego Rivera was a major influence on both George Biddle and many San Francisco artists. Born in Guanajuato, Mexico in 1886, he studied painting in Madrid, Paris, and Italy. In Italy, he was attracted to buon fresco painting, One fresco, or true fresco, is a technique in which ground pigments in water are applied to wet plaster. The painting is not on the wall. Instead, it actually becomes a part of the wall because the pigments penetrate the wet plaster and become part of the wall. When he returned to Mexico in 1923, Rivera began to work on the first of what became many large fresco murals for public buildings. His frescoes attracted attention around the world. Ralph Stackpole, whom you also see here, was a faculty member of the California School of Fine Arts, now the San Francisco Art Institute. He was a friend of Rivera from their student days in Paris, and in 1930, Stackpole was instrumental in bringing Rivera to San Francisco to paint fresco murals at the California School of Fine Arts and at the new addition to the Stock Exchange. Soon after that, Rivera did 2 huge murals in Detroit, and in 1933, he began work on a mural at Rockefeller Center, which was then under construction. By late 1933, members of the San Francisco art community were very well familiar with Rivera's work. At the time the PWAP was created to provide work for unemployed artists, there was a large and very hungry community of artists in San Francisco. Victor Arnautoff had arrived in the city in 1931 after spending 2 years as an assistant to Rivera in Mexico. He painted this mural of his fellow artists and one of their models in 1932. Many of them had studios in the vicinity of Washington and Montgomery Streets, and many of them had studied at the California School of Fine Arts. 5 of them in this mural, I've highlighted their names, were later employed at Coit Tower, and several others in the mural were part of other PWAP art projects. Roosevelt appointed a San Franciscan, Edward Bruce, to administer the PWAP. San Francisco became District 15, and Walter Heil, the head of the DeYoung Museum, was named director. Heil and his planning committee had to work fast because funding for the PWAP was limited to just a few months, just to get people through the winter. They soon fixed on Coit Tower as a place to create public murals in the style of Diego Rivera. More than 50 artists applied to work there. The finalists were chosen by Heil and his committee with advice from Stackpole. Because of his experience as an assistant to Rivera, Victor Arnautoff was designated as technical coordinator for the entire project. And the artists agreed that they'd follow the color palette and the technique of Rivera. Most of them agreed. Directives from Washington specified that the subject matter for all PWAP art, and this was true of later New Deal art as well, should be the American scene in all its aspects. The local planning committee further defined the subject matter at Coit Tower to be present-day California. The ground floor was for murals on agriculture, industry, and city life. The second floor was to deal with recreation and home life. Many of the artists chosen for the project had studied at the California School of Fine Arts. Several had worked with Rivera. They were all paid the same, about $30 a week for a 30-hour week, about $1 an hour. Now, $1 in 1933 had about the same purchasing power as about $19 or $20 today. So it's not as bad as it sounds with $1 an hour. However, all the evidence indicates that they all worked for many more hours than the 30 for which they were actually paid. There were 25 lead artists. Depending on how you count, there are between 27 and 30 murals. This diagram shows the ground floor design. There are also murals along the stairway to the second floor and along the second floor corridor and in a small room at the end of that corridor. So I'm now going to give you a virtual tour of all the murals, beginning at the entrance and turning left. So when you come in from the parking lot, you come in, oh, whoa, whoa, that's not what I want. You come in here. So that's where we're going to be, coming in. And this is what you see as you walk in. This mural is by Raymond Boynton. He was a faculty member at the California School of Fine Arts, born on a farm in Iowa. He studied at the Academy of Fine Arts in Chicago. He began teaching at the California School of Fine Arts in 1919, and he was among the very first to begin to use buon fresco in San Francisco. And he began teaching that technique at the California School of Fine Arts in the 1920s. He taught several of the other artists at Coit Tower. This first mural is divided in two parts, and what we're going to be doing is walking in the front door and turning to the left. And on the left are scenes of agriculture. This is Boynton's mural called Animal Force Subsistence. And as you see, these are essentially farm scenes using animal power and human muscle power. Directly across from it is this part of a larger mural by Gordon Langdon, also dealing with agriculture in various ways. This part of it deals with the timber industry, and it's a little hard to see because of the glare from some of the protective panels that are over it. But this is the rest of Gordon Langdon's mural, depicting dairy farming and cattle raising. Langdon was born in San Francisco. He was only 23 years old when he began work on this. He had studied at the California School of Fine Arts, and he based this mural on his family's farm in Olema, just up in Marin County. He included a small self-portrait, and he also included portraits of two of the other artists, Lucien Lebeau and Ralph Stackpole. The artists often used each other as their models. Around the corner from the cattle raising, we have the meat industry by Ray Bertrand, who was just 24 years old, another former student at the California School of Fine Arts, and someone who later taught there. This continues the depiction of California agriculture. Facing the east window is one of the 6 largest murals by Maxine Albro. She was born in Iowa. She studied in New York and Paris and at the California School of Fine Arts. She had traveled extensively in Mexico and had observed Diego Rivera at work there. This depicts California agriculture. The right-hand side shows fruit raising, viticulture, and winemaking. She included several of her fellow artists here. Parker Hall, who was later her husband, is picking apricots. The left-hand side of her mural depicts haying and cattle raising in the distance, greenhouse cultivation and vegetable raising in the middle distance, and flower raising and orange growing at the front. And the oranges are packed in crates marked with the Blue Eagle of the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, which was the best known New Deal agency as of 1933, 34, and the Blue Eagle was probably the most prominent symbol of the New Deal at that time. Along either side of the east windows and facing Albro's mural are these 2 large figures of a farmer and a cowboy. They're by Clifford Wight, continuing the theme of agriculture. Wight was born in England. He had also been an assistant for Diego Rivera, both in San Francisco and later in Detroit. Some people have suggested that the cowboy might be a self-portrait. And continuing down that wall, next to the window, is this department store mural, which is the beginning of the transition to city life. The south side of the main floor is taken up by city life. This mural by Freddie Vidor shows a department store lunch counter and wine shop, again continuing to show the influence of agriculture on city life. Here they're consuming food and buying wine, which had only just become legal a short time before. Vidor was born in Denmark. He was 22 years old at the time he started this project. He had studied at the Royal Academy in Copenhagen, the Academy of Fine Art in Munich, and in France. And he had also studied at the California School of Fine Arts. Just around the corner is this mural by George Harris, age 21, still a student at the California School of Fine Arts. He incorporated 4 urban economic activities in this mural. At the top, the agricultural commodities market with prices plummeting, another link to agriculture and to the Great Depression. The stock market, also with prices falling. A law library, symbolic of San Francisco's large legal profession. And banking, symbolized by the Federal Reserve Bank for District 12. Facing the south window is this mural by Victor Arnautoff depicting city life. It's probably his work that is most widely known because of his experience with Diego Rivera and with fresco painting. He was again given one of the large spaces to work on. He had been born in Imperial Russia. He'd served as a cavalry officer in World War I, and then in one of the White Armies in Siberia during the Russian Civil War. He was one of the older artists at the age of 37. He had attended the California School of Fine Arts in the 1920s before going to work with Rivera, and he had studied mural painting with Boynton. The right side of his mural includes the old produce market at the foot of Market Street, again linking the murals of city life to the agricultural scenes on the east side of the building. The rest of it shows downtown streets, including a marquee for Charlie Chaplin's recent film, City Lights. Most of the artists just ignored things like doors and windows, but Arnautoff used the door in the middle of his mural as the back door of a newsstand. And for many years it was simply closed. Now it's open, so perhaps it's a tribute to the fact that he was showing a newsstand. That's where they sell the tickets to the elevator. He also put a self-portrait on this side, looking at the newsstand. He's the man in the gray hat. The other side of his mural shows some industrial scenes all the way over at the left-hand side, which is a connection to the industrial scenes on the west side of the building. Next to the newsstand on Montgomery Street in the financial district, he shows a well-dressed man being robbed by 2 other well-dressed men, which is perhaps his comment on life in the financial district. In the distance, there's an automobile wreck in front of the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange, which may have been his way of commenting on the stock market crash. A fire engine is coming to the scene of the crash with a large number 5 on the front, which is likely an homage to Lily Hitchcock Coit, who as a child in the 1860s admired Knickerbocker Engine Company number 5, one of San Francisco's volunteer fire companies at the time. And you'll see also in the distance there City Hall, and the Stock Exchange building includes stackpole sculptures in a prominent place. Around the east windows are these two tall figures symbolizing, again, urban life by Harold Mallet Dean. The stockbroker is probably modeled on A.P. Giannini, the founder of the Bank of America. The scientist inventor is modeled after Nobel Prize winner Albert Michelson, a physicist. Harold Mallet Dean was born in Spokane, Washington. He'd worked there as a banker until 1927 when he moved to San Francisco and enrolled at the California School of Fine Arts and studied with Ray Boynton. You see a pattern here with many of these artists. One of the interesting things that he did, that Dean did, was to turn a light switch into the door of the observatory. Instead of just ignoring it, he turned it into part of his picture. And the next part of urban life is this public library scene by Bernard Zakheim. Zakheim was born in Poland. He arrived in San Francisco in 1920 seeking political asylum after World War I. He had begun studying art in Europe, and he continued at the California School of Fine Arts. In 1933, early 1933, he won a competition for a fresco mural at the Jewish Community Center, unfortunately now demolished. Zakheim's library mural puts his political content up front with bold newspaper headlines that include many issues of the day, especially those of concern to the left. Also, right in the middle is a band modeled on one of the other artists, John Langley Howard, who's pulling down a copy of Karl Marx's Das Kapital from the library shelves. And right around the corner from Zakheim's mural is this one by Susanna Scheuer on news gathering and the creation of the daily newspaper. It's, again, a transition from city life to industry, because publishing was one of the significant industries in San Francisco at the time. She was born in San Jose, studied at the California School of Fine Arts, and she spent time at the San Francisco Chronicle to observe all the entire process of creating a daily newspaper, from gathering the news to setting the type and running the presses and so forth. Facing the west window is this large mural by Ralph Stackpole on industries of California. Stackpole was born in Oregon. He was one of the older artists there, 48. He studied at what was originally the Mark Hopkins Institute of Art, but it later became the California School of Fine Arts, and he then became a faculty member there. He had studied in Paris with Giotardo Piazzoni. Those of you who are familiar with the Piazzoni murals that used to be at the Public Library and are now at the Dion Museum. He and Stackpole and Piazzoni shared a studio for many years. And Piazzoni also taught at the California School of Fine Arts. When Stackpole was in Paris, he had met Rivera. They became friends. They communicated with each other all their lives. There's a collection of their letters over at the Bancroft Library in French, which was the language that they shared. Stackpole was both a sculptor and a painter, and Despedet is probably better known for his sculpture. This is the right side of that mural. It's been compared to some of Rivera's murals of auto workers in Detroit. Here Stackpole shows food canning, sugar refining, and metalworking, all major components of the Bay Area's industrial economy at that time. The cannery workers include some of the only Asian Americans in the murals. And again, we have the Blue Eagle of the NRA on the bags of sugar. The other side of Stackpole's mural shows metalworking, oil refining, and chemicals. Again, all major components of the Bay Area's industrial economy at that time. And facing that mural, along either side of the west windows, are these two tall figures, again by Clifford Wight. Clifford Wight had done the farmer and the cowboy. He also did the surveyor and the steel worker. From that west window, It was possible to watch, at a distance of course, but to watch the steel workers constructing the Golden Gate Bridge, which was under construction as all of this was going on. And next to the steel worker, we have this mural by William Hesthall showing transportation, railroad and waterborne transportation, the two major types of commercial transportation in San Francisco and the Bay Area at that time. Hesthall began attending classes at the California School of Fine Arts at the age of 9 and began exhibiting at the age of 10. The waterfront side of this mural seems rather moribund, but on the railroad side, the workers are removing the weeds from the tracks and giving the locomotive a clear path, which might be a metaphor for the New Deal beginning to get the economy moving. Some have seen the maritime side of this as a reflection of the 1934 longshore and maritime strikes, but it's not possible because Hesthall had completed this mural a month before the strike began, and he had completed the initial sketches even before there was any talk about a strike. John Langley Howard did this mural that's on the north wall. On what's the right-hand side here is the main entrance to the building. So we're now almost all the way back to the main entrance. John Langley Howard was born in New Jersey, but he came to California with his parents as an infant. He majored in engineering and English at UC Berkeley, but then he started to study arts at the Oakland College of Arts and Crafts, and then studying in New York as well. His father, John Galen Howard, was the architect for much of UC Berkeley and for the old Civic Center Library, which is now the Asian Art Museum. John Langley Howard was the brother of Henry Howard, who was one of the co-designers in Coit Tower, and his other brother was a sculptor, Robert Boardman Howard, who did the exterior sculptures at Coit Tower. So the Howard family was very well represented, and we'll come to yet one more of that family. The right-hand side shows oil drilling and a worker taking a cigarette break. And the newspaper that's crumpled up at his feet has headlines about increased spending for the Navy and rising unemployment, one of Howard's many comments about the Depression. There's more about the Depression in Howard's one mural than in all the other murals, almost all of them put together. The center of his mural shows two men panning for gold, which some unemployed people took to doing during the Depression. And there's a homeless family living in a tent with a broken down car out in front, and a woman sawing wood to build a fire to cook their meal. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a limousine, a chauffeur, and a wealthy family who are clearly looking quite horrified at the sight of the homeless people.
The green suit.
All the way up in the corner. There's a limousine and the man in the green suit. There's also a little foo-foo dog for the wealthy family and a dog that looks emaciated for the homeless family. And on the left side of Howard's mural is these unemployed men marching on May Day. And it's clear that they're on May Day because one of them is carrying what was originally the Western Worker, the newspaper of the Communist Party. These unemployed men included at least one African American. There are only two in all of the murals, and a few that were probably intended to be Latinos. Now, you may have noticed by now that almost everyone in the murals is white. The population of the Bay Area at that time was 94% white. So most of the artists were simply painting the faces that they saw all around them in the Bay Area. And you actually have to give some credit to Stackpole and Howard and LeBeau for going out of their way to include some people of color. Facing Howard's mural about the Depression is the other half of Ray Boynton's mural, which we saw at the very beginning. And this side is called Machine Power Wealth. It has nothing to do with the Depression or unemployment or anything of that sort. And now we're back to where we started. This is the entrance to the elevator lobby. It's directly across from the main entrance. It's again part of Boynton's work, much more, I don't know, impressionistic than the rest of it. There's been various explanations for those eyes over the door. Some have suggested that they're the eyes of Diego Rivera, but Boynton really left no clue as to what he intended with those eyes. And directly across from this, over the main door, is this very small mural, the smallest one of all 25, or 27, or however we count, by Fred Olmsted Jr., who was hired originally as an assistant, but John Langley Howard gave him the little place over the main door, and this is what he put there. It's called Power, and it's perhaps intended to suggest the power of working people when they get upset, as they were becoming upset in 1933 and 34. If we go into the elevator lobby, what we find there are 4 large murals and 3 smaller ones, and they are all oil on canvas. There were 3 artists who said, we've never done fresco, we don't want to do fresco, we don't know how to do fresco, we want to do traditional oil on canvas painting, and so they gave them a separate room. And this is where they did their murals. They're really not obviously oil on canvas. They really look like they belong with all the rest of them because they use very much the same color palette. Otis Oldfield, I'm losing my place. Otis Oldfield was born in California in 1890. He studied art in Paris. He became an instructor at the California School for Fine Arts. He was considered very bold and very modern by local art critics, and a leading figure in California modernism during the 20s and 30s. He did this in his studio, which was just down the hill a short ways from Coit Tower. And the view of the bay is the view from his studio. But it's also very much the view from this point. If you could look through the wall of Coit Tower at this point, this is very much the view that you would see. His daughters appear in the right, lower right. They also appear in LeBeau's mural. Now, notice that as of 1934, no Treasure Island. Treasure Island wasn't created until the late 30s, so what you see here is just open bay water where Treasure Island was later created. On the opposite wall is this mural by Jose Moya del Pino, showing the view more or less from this site looking north. Moya del Pino was born in Spain in 1891. He studied art in Granada and Madrid and Paris, and spent time in Paris with Diego Rivera and Pablo Picasso, and then moved to San Francisco. He had been primarily a portrait painter until he got this commission, and was later an instructor at the California School of Fine Arts. In the lower right of this painting, he put himself looking over Oldfield's shoulder as Oldfield was sketching. And we know it's Oldfield because the man is wearing a beret, and Oldfield always wore a beret. There are 2 other large murals in the elevator lobby by Rinaldo Caneo, who was the oldest of the artists, age 56. Born in San Francisco, raised in North Beach, studied at the California School of Fine Arts and in Paris. He was involved in every major art exhibition in San Francisco from 1916 through 1939. Oldfield also did these 3 small murals of seabirds and a map of the Bay Area, which was over at the elevator door. The largest of all the murals is Lucien Lebeau's Powell Street, which winds up the curving staircase to the 2nd floor. It represents fashionable and affluent San Francisco all the way from Market Street to the top of Nob Hill. Lebeau was born in Paris. He was educated in France, but he was essentially self-taught as an artist. He initially worked as a costume and fashion designer. He taught at the California School of Fine Arts, and then he opened his own art school with his wife, Georgette. He was another leading figure in California modernism between the world wars. He included these portraits of Eleanor Roosevelt and Edward Bruce and other officials of the PWAP as a way of paying homage to these important figures in the creation of that art program. Almost every face in Lebeau's mural is an actual person. Almost every single face. He also included Timothy Pfluger's 450 Sutter Street. He included his own art studio. He included the Bank of America branch at Powell and Market. He included one of the 2 African Americans and one of the very few Asians. And at the top of the mural, he put the Oldfield girls again. This is what it looks like at the top of the mural on the 2nd floor. It's a narrow, curving hallway with a wide hall at one end and a room at the other end. It must have been very difficult to work in those close quarters. It's almost impossible to take good photographs of the murals in those close quarters. This is the one right at the top of the stairs. It's by Ralph Chessy and it's called Children at Play. He was from New Orleans, self-taught as an artist. He also worked as a professional puppeteer in children's theater. It's been suggested that his depiction of the children here is reflective of some of his work with puppets. He said he was inspired by early American primitive painters who traveled and had stock figures of children, and then they would put different faces on them as they went from home to home to get commissions. Opposite his mural is this kind of open hallway that leads to a door, and on all 3 sides of it there are murals depicting different types of athletics. Parker Hall gave collegiate athletics on one wall, including the big game. You can see that that's Cal and Stanford. On either side of the door, Edward Terada put these depictions of athletics. And on the wall facing halls, he did polo. Now, you might wonder about polo, but you know Golden Gate Park does have a polo ground, and it was used for polo at one time. I haven't confirmed that it was still being used for polo in 1933. The largest mural up there is by Ben Cunningham, and it stretches around one whole wall with a door in the center that was the entrance to the caretaker's apartment. So he covered both sides of that wall and the area over the door, but it's just absolutely impossible to be able to get all of it in one photograph, so I've given it to you in pieces. The elevator stops on the 2nd floor, and this is over the elevator door, this very nice painting of geese by Edith Hamlin. And right below them, on either side of the elevator door, we have the hunters shooting at the geese. And around the corner, we have one of the hunters holding up a duck that he has bagged. Edith Hamlin was 31 years old at the time. She had attended the California School of Fine Arts and later went to Columbia University Teachers College. She later did some large murals at Mission High School. She married Maynard Dixon, who had helped her with those Mission High School murals, and they moved to the Southwest. You're probably familiar with some of Maynard Dixon's work from the Southwest. Edith Hamlin did work very similar to that of Maynard Dixon after she moved there. And this is also her deer over the entrance to the last room. The last room depicts home life, and it's by Jane Berlandina, the whole room. Her style and her palette are absolutely different than everything else at Coit Tower, as you can see. She was clearly a rebel against the artist's agreement to use Rivera's palette and to use buon fresco. She painted on dry plaster using tempera, which is a paint made from eggs. And because she didn't want to do the kind of work all the other artists had agreed to do, they gave her a separate room. Remember, the ones who used oil and canvas were given a separate room. She was given a separate room. And she used each wall of this small room to depict a different room in a house. She was born in France. She studied in Paris. She married the architect Henry Howard, who had helped to design Coit Tower. So she was a sister-in-law of John Langley Howard, who did the mural downstairs, and the sister-in-law of Robert Boardman Howard, who did the sculptures on the outside, and the daughter-in-law of John Galen Howard, the architect of the city library. Her unusual color scheme, when compared to the rest of the murals, makes me wonder what she is suggesting by this. You know, is this a vision of home life that was not possible for most Americans at the time? Because this is clearly a very prosperous family. They have a grand piano, they're playing bridge, they've got a woman in the kitchen who is clearly not a family member preparing food. Or is this simply the family life she knew as a member of the Howard family? Well, she didn't tell us, and so we're left to guess. So that's the end of the actual tour of the murals. That was the last room. From early January through the end of March and into April, Coit Tower was what Walter Heil in January called, quote, a swarming beehive of master artists, assistants, and plasterers, as well as newspaper reporters, unquote. In addition to the 25 lead artists and nearly as many assistants, all of whom were artists in their own right, there were 2 plasterers, because they had to have fresh plaster every day. They could each work on only about a 3x3 section of wet plaster every day. So they needed plaster, constantly needed plasterers. There were 7 laborers, several park department employees, and a few volunteers. About 60 people in all, although not all of them were present at the same time. The artists who were painting on adjoining walls had to work in shifts. Suzanne Scheuer, who was working right next to Bernard Zakheim, remembered that her shift began at 5 a.m. because Zakheim didn't want to get up that early. After visitors were barred as being too disruptive, people often stood outside and pressed their faces against the windows to watch. Hamlin later recalled, quote, a great camaraderie among all of the artists. Chesse remembered that they all had picnic lunches together at noontime. Hebe Down, one of the assistants, said we'd buy big slabs of cheese and salami and bread, which was all easily available just down the hill in the Italian stores around Washington Square. Oldfield reminisced that when one of the artists finished, they'd all celebrate with sherry or wine, which was recently legalized, but had always been available in North Beach anyway throughout Prohibition. Given the many people in the tower, the artists used each other as models, and some of them appear in several of the murals. They also used their children, or other artists' children. I've met all four of the people shown here, as adults of course, some of whom have since passed away and the others are now in their 90s. All of them took great pride in their father's work and visited the murals regularly. And one of them actually did a very nice book about the murals. Before they began to paint, the artists had to present half-inch to 1-foot drawings of their proposed murals for approval. Several of those scale drawings, along with initial sketches and watercolors, are in the Achenbach Foundation for Graphic Arts at the California Palace of the Legion of Honor. When you compare the surviving drawings with the finished murals, it's clear the artists made some modifications, but nearly all of them were relatively minor. Zakheim showed in his drawing that half of the library would depict people reading newspapers, but he selected the headlines day by day based on what caught his eye in the press of the day before. Arnautoff sketched out the crowded downtown streets, but did not include the depiction of a man being robbed. John Ninley Howard departed the most from his initial sketches, as you can see. His initial sketches depicted the subject he was assigned: California mineral extraction and hydroelectric power. He put those topics in the background and used the foreground to present the victims of the Depression. He later remembered that he had not consulted anyone about the changes he made. When comparing the surviving drawings with the final murals, it's clear that Howard was really the exception. The large majority kept very close to their early designs and only modified some of the details. About 8 weeks into the work, an event in New York City sent shockwaves through the nation's art communities. The Rockefeller family had commissioned Diego Rivera to create a large mural in Rockefeller Center, which was then under construction. When he included a portrait of Lenin, Nelson Rockefeller told him to remove it. Rivera refused. Rockefeller stopped work on the mural, covered it, and had it destroyed. San Francisco newspapers carried the story on February 13th of 1934. The next day, the Artists and Writers Union, which was just a few months old, had a protest meeting outside Coit Tower, and many of the Coit Tower artists attended. Headlines about the protest appeared in Zakheim's mural of a public library and in Vidar's mural of a department store lunch counter. Albro's mural includes a large stand of calla lilies, a flower associated with Rivera by that time. Although I don't know that that's what she intended, but it seems more than a coincidence. Coit Tower muralists experienced their own controversies. A minor instance involved Ben Cunningham's depiction of a nude boy being photographed while wading in a stream in the mural on the second floor. Cunningham apparently received repeated complaints from the caretaker's wife, who lived on that floor, and walked past the mural every day, so he gave the boy a swimsuit. Most of the artists had finished by the middle or late April. Scheuer announced that the work was complete in a newspaper headline in her mural dated April. A few of the artists, those with the largest areas, had not finished by then, but that's when the money ran out. Heil was able to secure funds from the State Emergency Relief Administration to allow those artists to continue. LeBeau had the greatest number of square feet and also a very difficult location along both sides of the curving staircase. He was the last to finish. A serious controversy arose on the main floor. The areas above the 3 ground floor windows were assigned to the artists who had painted the tall figures beside those windows. Clifford Wight on the east and west side, and Harold Mallet Dean on the south side. The areas above the windows were considered so minor that the artists were not required to submit sketches for prior approval. Above the west windows, Wight placed 3 symbols. On the left, a $ sign and the motto, "In God We Trust," which was his version of rugged individualism. In the center, he put the blue eagle of the NRA, the most prominent symbol of the New Deal. And on the right, he put the communist hammer and sickle and the motto, "Workers of the World Unite." Arnautoff's memoirs, which were printed more than 30 years later, present a conversation regarding the hammer and sickle between Arnautoff, the technical coordinator, and Wight. So I'm quoting Arnautoff now. Wight was painting an area above 3 windows, and the fresco fell into 3 parts, united by a common theme. The theme seemed too risky to some, insomuch as a hammer and sickle were represented in one part. I asked Clifford, "You're not afraid of an uproar?" "What uproar?" he replied, surprised. "I feel somehow there'll be some unpleasantness." "Really?" I viewed the outlines of the still uncompleted hammer and sickle and said, "That's like waving a red flag in front of a bull." Wight gave a mischievous wink and said, "Very much so, but I'm an optimist. Don't we live in the land of the free, as the newspapers tell us 100 times a day? Can't I then freely express my thoughts and feelings?" "But you must know freedom in America is understood in a special way." Wight's eyes blazed in anger. "So be it. I'm not afraid of anything, even a scandal." The scandal soon broke. Arthur Brown Jr., the architect of Coit Tower and one of the city's most prominent architects, had been hesitant about the murals from the beginning. He saw Wight's hammer and sickle on Saturday, June 23rd, and quickly informed Herbert Fleischacker, banker, philanthropist, prominent political mover and shaker, and head of both the Art Commission and the Park Commission. Fleischacker directed Heil to deal with the situation. All the murals then received very close scrutiny. Zakheim's mural of a public library included the Western Worker, the local communist newspaper, and books by leftist authors. And in the center of Zakheim's mural, we have a man reaching for Marx's Das Kapital. John Langley Howard's mural included the Western Worker. You can't see it, but it was there originally. And a group of angry men demonstrating on May Day. And Victor Arnautoff put the communist publications New Masses and Daily Worker on his newsstand. Soon after Brown's message to Fleischacker, the park department locked the doors, canceled the official opening date, and whitewashed the windows to prevent anyone from seeing inside, likely on orders from Fleischacker. By then, San Francisco was in the midst of a major Red Scare. 6 weeks before, on May 9th, longshore workers had gone on strike in all the Pacific Coast ports. Other maritime unions soon followed, shutting down most shipping. Shipping executives quickly blamed communists, as did most of the city's newspapers and many of the city's political and business leaders. Fear of a red menace escalated after July 5th, when an effort to open the port using strikebreakers protected by city police brought resistance from strikers and strike sympathizers. Police responded with clubs, tear gas, riot guns, and gunfire, killing 2 men and seriously injuring more than 100. The governor sent in the National Guard to patrol the waterfront. set up machine gun nests at intersections, and deployed tanks to protect the strikebreakers. Also on July 5th, the San Francisco Examiner published a photograph under the heading "Soviet Symbol in Tower." The photograph combined White's hammer and sickle with the part of Bernard Zakheim's mural depicting a man reaching for Das Kapital. The accompanying article labeled the work "Communist Propaganda." 2 days later, Junius Cravens, art critic for the San Francisco News, the most liberal of the city's 4 daily papers, called it the tempest in the Coit Memorial Tower teapot. But he also suggested, quote, at least 3 naughty boys had indulged in a little communist propaganda, unquote. Heil telegraphed Bruce in Washington for advice. Bruce told him, quote, the best way to clean it up is to destroy the white painting. 16 of the Coit Tower artists agreed on July 30th, requesting immediate removal of, quote, the offending work, unquote. The striking longshore and maritime workers returned to work the next day on July 31st, and the Red Scare began to die down a bit. On August 1st, a special committee of the Art Commission recommended, quote, for artistic reasons, unquote, that, quote, the 3 panels over the west, south, and east windows in the main floor be removed, unquote. The full commission unanimously approved and asked the park department to make the changes, quote, for the adornment and beautification of the interior, unquote. Since then, the areas over all 3 windows have been the same color as the walls and ceiling. For White's symbols, the plaster was apparently broken out and replaced, since the most recent restoration found no trace of paintings underneath later layers of paint. On Howard's mural, the Western Worker banner was painted over. You can see where there is a section above the print there that was originally the newspaper banner for the Western Worker. I put an actual Western Worker banner in the center so you can see what the newspaper actually looked like. And down below, you see where Zakheim's Western Worker has the hammer and sickle kind of fuzzed out, smeared or blurred or whatever. So all the hammers and sickles were removed before the tower was opened. The tower opened to the public on October 12th, 1934, and art critics were enthusiastic. Subsequent historians have been equally enthusiastic, arguing that the murals vividly demonstrate many of the central characteristics of later New Deal art: the use of fresco, the influence of the Mexican mural movement, the influence of the Depression, and the centrality of the American scene, both contemporary and historical. Some historians have pointed to the destruction of the murals over the windows as a signal to artists on the federal payroll that they did not have complete freedom of expression. But that was never even implied for the Coit Tower artists. Their subjects were assigned, and their preliminary drawings had to be approved by the Art Commission. The controversy also served as a warning to administrators of later New Deal art programs to require prior approval of details so they would not have to engage in potentially controversial censorship of completed projects. Edward Bruce was later administrator of the Treasury Section Art Program, and he seems to have carried the lessons of Coit Tower with him. At Coit Tower, authorities had exercised censorship after the fact. Subsequent Treasury Section administrators carefully exercised prior control over all of the works, requiring explicit detailed drawings, sometimes full size, for all proposed murals under their jurisdiction, and by making certain that artists understood that they were not to deviate from approved designs. Problems with the Coit Tower murals did not end in October 1934. Leaks in the roof, already a problem when the original artists were at work in 1933 and 34, have continued to the present, despite repeated roof repairs, producing efflorescence on some of the murals. If you go there, there's a good chance that if you look in some of the upper corners, you'll see this kind of white powder that's caused as moisture comes through the walls and deposits those white minerals on the surface of the murals. Once the tower was opened, there was little or no supervision. Visitors carelessly brushed against the murals as they walked past. Some carved their initials into the murals or otherwise vandalized them. One proposal for dealing with the vandalism in 1957 was to cover them all with redwood and aluminum panels. By the late 1950s, the problems had become so severe that the first floor murals were closed off, allowing visitors access only to the elevator lobby. And taking the elevator to the top has always been the most popular part of that tower for tourists. Closing off the ground floor murals was accomplished, ironically, by bolting door hinges and latches into some of the murals. The staircase was also closed off. In the early 1960s, some restoration was undertaken, led by Dorothy Puccinelli-Cravath, who had created her own PWAP murals at the zoo in 1933, 34, and later in the 30s. Some of the original artists returned to restore their own work, and the ground floor was again opened to the public. In 1975, another restoration project was commissioned by the city, this time led by Emmylou Packard, a major artist in her own right and a former assistant to Diego Rivera. She cleaned and repaired all the murals on both floors following extensive research and consultation. Guard ropes were installed to prevent visitors from getting too close to the ground floor murals. And again, some of the fixtures for the guard ropes were attached with screws into the murals. In 1988-89, Ann Rosenthal, a professional art conservator, led an assessment of the murals and concluded, quote, "The amount of damage is collectively extensive and alarming," unquote. Her assessment was followed by an extensive project to conserve, repair, and fully document all the murals, which was completed in 1992. An improved barrier system was installed to protect the ground floor frescoes from visitor contact. If you've been there, you know that none of the guard rails are attached to the murals. They're attached to the floors and the walls. Brass plates were installed to protect several of the doorways, and plexiglass panels were placed to protect vulnerable areas of murals near the main entrance. Access to the second floor has continued to be limited because of insufficient space to install barriers there. Another major renovation and restoration project took place recently in 2012 and 2014. The same team that had done the previous one. This time they took cross sections and scrapings of the walls to determine the original colors of the walls and the ceilings on the first floor. And Rosenthal told me that they discovered that the original color of the walls and ceilings was a light gray buff, which leaves a standard of whiteness within the frescoes where it should be, so that the frescoes are the brightest things in the room, not the ceiling or the walls. When I first walked in there and saw the grayish walls, I thought, what have they done? Because the walls had been very, very white before they did this restoration, but what they did was restore the original colors. The restoration also recreated the original red stripe at the top of the murals, which frames and balances the murals. The walls of the elevator lobby were returned to their original color, which Ann Rosenthal calls pumpkin-like, which balances out the cool tones of those landscapes. This restoration received a Governor's Historic Preservation Award in 2015. Coit Tower, with its murals, was designated as a city landmark in 1984 and added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2008. It is currently moving toward designation as a National Historic Landmark, in major part due to the murals and their national significance for New Deal art. So here's a shameless plug for my book, if you're interested in learning more about Victor Arnautoff, and thanks to our three sponsors. And I'm happy to take any of your questions or comments. That was longer than I expected to talk, sorry. Yes? In answer to the first question, how was Coit Tower chosen? When the district director got the money in December, early December, he got together a planning committee of leading San Francisco citizens and artists, and they started thinking, how can we spend this money before the end of April? And Coit Tower had just been dedicated only a couple of months before. Originally, they had thought that the interior of it might be a museum of pioneer days. That's Pioneer Park around Coit Tower, you know. And so they thought there might be artifacts and such to display in there. But it was empty at the time. And given all of the popularity of Rivera's work, including his work in San Francisco, it was immediately suggested that they could do Rivera-style murals at Coit Tower. Arthur Brown was not happy about that, but he didn't like this whole idea of murals at all. But he thought that if they did them at Coit Tower, he could save the Opera House from having this kind of desecration. Because he had also done the Opera House, which had opened only shortly before. So he sort of offered up Coit Tower as a sacrifice, with the idea that if they didn't like them, they could just get rid of them later. Now, your second question.
Did you find these WPA murals all across the country, or were they just in certain locations?
New Deal murals exist all across the country. There were several different art programs. The PWAP only lasted until April of 1934. But the State Emergency Relief Administration then took over the job of providing work for unemployed artists. So the big Arnautoff murals out here in the other lobby were funded by the State Emergency Relief Administration. When the WPA was created in 1935, it also created an artist program, a fine arts project. And so WPA paid for murals all over the country, including the ones at George Washington High School and the ones at Mission High School in San Francisco. The murals at Theodore Roosevelt Middle School were part of PWAP, so they also came in the earlier time period. At the Mothers Building in the zoo, the Mothers Building was a building donated by the Flyshackers in memory of their mother, which is why it's one of the reasons it's called the Mothers Building, but it was also a place for mothers to kind of rest when they had their children at the zoo. And the whole interior of it is an incredible mural of Noah's Ark with all of the animals, because it was a zoo. So here was a theme to create all kinds of different animals in the mural around the top of that building.
How did you get so interested in this?
Well, let me finish with the Mothers Building and then I'll answer. The Mothers Building is really interesting because all the artists there were women. I think it is probably the largest New Deal art project to have been done entirely by women, because there are some mosaic murals at the entrance that were also done by women. So there were 5 women artists who worked there, first under PWAP and then under WPA. And they're badly in need of restoration. The Park Commission needs to put some money into it to protect them and restore the murals there. Now, your question.
How did you get so interested in Victor and the murals?
Well, at one point, I was teaching a senior seminar, which is a research seminar for history majors, senior history majors. And I used the 1930s in San Francisco as the theme for the seminar. So we did readings about the Depression and the New Deal, and they were all supposed to do research papers based on primary sources dealing with San Francisco in the 1930s. And as one part of that, I set up a field trip to Coit Tower and was really so happy that Masha Zakheim agreed to take us around and see those murals. That really got me interested. And then, a number of years later, the Presidio Historical Association board was talking about, let's have a lecture series. And I knew that there was an Arnautoff mural at the Presidio. I hadn't seen it, but I knew it was here. So I said, well, I'll do a lecture on that mural, and it'll be mostly about New Deal art, but you know, it's a connection to the Presidio. So that summer, before I gave this talk, I ordered up the microfilm of Arnautoff's archival materials at the Archives of American Art, and I scrolled through the microfilm, and I thought, this is really, really interesting. And I eventually decided there's a book to be written here. And so that has led me into an interest more generally in New Deal art, especially in this area. As one of the other questions, you know, there's New Deal art all over the country, because one of the things the New Deal did was to spend on stimulus projects, to put up construction of new buildings. So they built a lot of new post offices. I think that you could almost guess that in every congressional district represented by a Democrat, somewhere there was going to be at least one new post office and probably more. And I'm sorry? Rincon was one of the last ones. But in all of those post offices, there are murals, not by unemployed artists, but chosen through the Treasury section, which had a competitive process. So Arnautoff did 2 post offices in Texas. Zakheim did a post office in Texas. Suzanne Scheuer did a post office in Texas. There were lots of post offices being built in Texas by the New Deal. And Arnautoff did 3 post offices in this area. And Ben Cunningham did one somewhere in Northern California. But there was art being done in all kinds of public buildings. Rincon Annex was really the last New Deal art project. And I say that without any doubt that it was the last, because it was not completed until after World War II. But it was a holdover from the last of the New Deal art projects. And so we can think that in San Francisco, we have the first large New Deal art project at Coit Tower, and we have the last large New Deal art project at Rincon Center. And they're both spectacular, they're both official landmarks. Yes?
Yeah, I'm a city guide at Coit Tower, and one of the things we learned where we read about this project, the artists got along so well, it was very smooth and so clean. But I recently talked to the family, her daughter, granddaughter of one of the artists, who told me there was a lot of social rancor there, especially between the artists who actually needed the work and the artists who didn't. Do you have any comments?
I'm not hearing everything that you've asked. I'm
Social
sorry.
rancor among the artists.
Was there some conflict among the artists? Bernard Zakheim did not get along well with Friede Vidar. Zakheim claimed he was a fascist, but I really don't know of any evidence for that. It's clear that Zakheim didn't like him. I don't know if it was reciprocated. But that may have been an exception, because in general they seem to have gotten along quite well. So much so that it evoked some comment from the planning committee who said, you know, we expect artists to be very prickly and not to get along, but here they were packed into this very small space, and they were all having lunch together and seemed to be getting along very well. So I think there may have been some individual things like that, but you know, it produced one wedding after all. Maxine Albro and Parker Hall got married as a result of working together at Coit Tower.
You might want to tell people there's a series of stamps that the Postal Service just released of the murals at the post offices around the country. So,
I didn't know that, but
Could you repeat what you...
yes, I'm going to repeat. The post office has just released a series of stamps based on the New Deal post office murals around the country. So you can get your own collection of photographs of the New Deal post office murals. Other questions or comments? Yes?
Did Arnautoff develop the scheme for what was going to be where, and have to divide up the themes to different artists, like who was
So the question is, did Arnautoff as a technical coordinator assign people to various topics and such? I don't think he did it. I think it was a planning committee that did that, because he says in his memoirs that originally he'd been assigned to agriculture, and he traded with Maxine Albro because he wanted to do city life.
Do you know who was on
The planning committee, I know who, I can tell you where to find their names, but Walter Heil, of course, was the head of the committee. And their names are in Zakheim's mural. He has a list of the names in his mural of the planning committee. But I can't give you the rest of the names off the top of my head. Stafford. But I'm sorry. None of them were actual participants in the Coit Tower work, but there were some of them who were well-known commercial artists or patrons of the arts. Other questions or comments? Yes?
Yeah, I'm a guide at Coit Tower, and I had some comments from a couple of visitors expecting to see hard labor kind of art, as you might see at Diego Rivera in Detroit, and the expectation that that was New Deal art. I just wondered if you had any comment on that. But you don't see it at Coit Tower.
Yeah, well, maybe some in Stackpole's. I mean, you do see people working on the kinds of industries that existed in this area. I mean, they weren't assembling automobiles in San Francisco. They were across the bay somewhere. I think there was a Ford assembly plant somewhere in the area. But Stackpole was depicting what was here. Why no sweaty, brawny laborers? I don't know.
I have a question as well. I'm familiar with Clifford Wight and the controversy regarding the murals over those three windows. I've often wondered why there were no murals or no murals in place over Harold and Dean's three windows. And you had mentioned
There were things. White did the area over both the east and the west windows, and Dean did the ones over the south windows. But they all fell victim to White's hammer and sickle, and they were all removed. And we don't know what Dean put up there. At the Achenbach Foundation, there's a sketch of what White put over the east windows, and they're sort of agricultural things. There's a cow's head and an ear of corn or something like that. But the Art Commission sent a subcommittee headed by a prominent artist whose name will come to me shortly, to look and decide what to do, and their recommendation was to take out what was over all of the windows. Now, that was a way of dealing with the problem, but you know, if what White did was typical of what Dean did, it really doesn't fit very well with the rest of what was going on there. So, I mean, you can at least see a little justification for taking them all out, because they were symbols, and that's just out of keeping with what all the rest of the painting was there.
I see.
And furthermore, one was a hammer and sickle. So, other questions or comments?
I know I've read your book, but it's interesting that Arnautoff was a white Russian, but he is also a communist.
Yes, the question is, you know, Arnautoff fought in one of the White Armies in the Russian Civil War, and then he later became a communist. That's one of the central questions I explore in my book. How do you understand someone making essentially a 180-degree political shift of that sort? And I think, like all things in history, it's complicated. But that's exactly right. I don't think he was a party member. Well, he was not a party member at the time he was working at Coit Tower. He was clearly aware of the Communist Party by then, because he put the Daily Worker on the newsstand that he painted. But he also put on some more conservative publications, so his work didn't attract quite the same attention that the other artists had attracted. He said in his memoirs that his politics had begun to change during the 2 years he spent with Diego Rivera, when they would work together long hours, deep into the night, talking about Rivera's visit to the Soviet Union, talking about Rivera's politics. Rivera was not a Communist Party member when Arnautoff worked with him. In fact, he'd been expelled from the Mexican Communist Party at that point for his bourgeois tendencies. And he had accepted a grant from a Wall Street banker to do the mural that he and Arnautoff worked on together for a year or so in Cuernavaca. So, I mean, we know that neither one of them was a party member at the time, and certainly Arnautoff, if he had been a party member, he would not have been allowed to work with Rivera, who had been expelled. But Rivera always considered himself a communist, whether he was in the party or not. He communist with a small c, and he rejoined the Mexican Communist Party in the 1950s after the death of Stalin. And he and Arnautoff had a reunion meeting in Mexico City at one point in the 1950s. Arnautoff, in his memoirs, said that he was also very affected by the struggle of the longshore and maritime workers. And he did some very dramatic wood block prints of that strike. So it's clear that he was expressing his political sympathies through his art in 1934. He always called himself a social realist and said that the artist is a critic of society, and in a number of his works in the 30s you see that criticism of society becoming more prominent. His FBI file says he joined the party in 1938, and that seems about right. I think that that's probably accurate. You have to trust the FBI on things like that. And he remained a party member until he immigrated to the Soviet Union. You know, at the age of 65, he retired from the Stanford art faculty, and the next year he emigrated to the Soviet Union and lived out the rest of his life there. But he was turned down from membership in the Communist Party once he got there. Other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you all very much.